Sometimes a room can feel different, even when nothing inside it has changed. Good to have you here. We break down real stories from 4chan, shared by people who found themselves in situations that didn't make sense at first. This one grows from atmosphere more than action, and that's what makes it stick. Get comfortable, dim the lights, and tap the bell. Let's start. The call came in a little after 9 on a Wednesday, and dispatch used the phrase that always made me tighten my ponytail before I even reached for the truck door. Someone's not doing well. That was all. No age, no chief complaint, just a road number out past the county line and a mailbox with a red flag on it. Ray was driving that night. He'd been with the service about 6 years by then. Calm guy, ex-Navy, the kind who didn't fill silence just to fill it. I liked working with him for exactly that reason. Rural Mississippi in October has a specific feeling once the sun's gone. The kudzu keeps its color for another few weeks, and it hangs over the fences like sheets somebody forgot to bring in. The air is still humid, but the humidity has an edge to it. You smell wood smoke from people burning yard trash, even when you can't see any fires. We ran out about 18 miles east of town, past the co-op, past the last gas station, past the little Baptist church with the sign that had said, "Pray for rain," all summer, and now said nothing at all because half the letters had blown off. The GPS gave up around mile 14, and Ray followed the road number by eye. Long, straight stretches of blacktop, with the yellow line worn nearly gone. No streetlights, no houses for long stretches. Then a dirt cutoff with a rusted mailbox and a red rag tied to the flag. The driveway went back maybe a quarter mile through pines. Ray killed the siren at the mouth of it. We always did on residential calls. No point in waking neighbors, though out here there weren't any neighbors to wake. The house sat in a clearing, 2 stories, wood siding gone gray, wraparound porch with the boards sagging in the middle. 2 vehicles out front, an older Ford pickup, and a green sedan I didn't recognize the make of. The porch light was on. That was the only light on the whole outside of the house. 5 people were waiting for us on the porch when I stepped out with the jump bag. 3 men, 2 women, all adults, 30s to maybe 60. The oldest was a heavy-set man in overalls with his hands folded across his stomach. Next to him was a woman I took for his wife, thin, gray hair pulled back tight. Then 2 younger men who looked like brothers, both with the same square jaw, and a woman about my age standing a little behind them. None of them came down the steps to meet me. None of them waved. They just watched me walk up. "Ma'am," the older man said. "She's upstairs, back bedroom." "What happened?" I asked. That's always the first question. It tells you more than the answer, sometimes, how they say it. "She went down," he said, "about an hour ago. We couldn't get her up." An hour. That was the first thing I noted. If someone in my family went down and I couldn't wake them, I was calling in the first 5 minutes, not the first 60. I asked her age, 72. Any conditions? Diabetes and blood pressure. Meds. He listed a few, correctly, in the right order. That part was fine. The younger woman stepped aside to let me through the front door, and I felt her eyes track me across the threshold. The inside of the house smelled like kerosene and old cooking grease, and something else underneath that I couldn't place. Not bad, exactly. Just closed up. Every window I could see was shut, and the curtains were drawn. A stopped clock on the mantle. A calendar from a feed store still turned to July. They walked me up, all 5 of them, single file behind me on the stairs. The bedroom was at the end of the hallway. Small room, single window, and the woman was on the bed on top of the quilt. Nightgown, no shoes, skin pale in the way that gets your attention right away. Breathing, but shallow. Miss Ada, they called her. Grandma, one of the younger men said. Grandma to some of them, mother to the older man. That's what I gathered. I set the bag down and got to work. Airway clear. Pulse thready, around 50. Blood pressure came in low, 80 over palp. Blood sugar was 38 on the glucometer. That right there explained the state she was in. Severe hypoglycemia in a diabetic her age. Not a mystery, just a woman who needed dextrose in a hospital. I opened an IV kit. That's when I realized how quiet the room was. 5 adults. Nobody was crying. Nobody was hovering. Nobody was asking if she was going to be okay. In 7 years of running calls in this county, I had never once walked into a house where a family member was unconscious on a bed and had the family say nothing. Even the coldest people ask something. Is she going to make it? Should we call her sister? Something. I glanced up while I was tying the tourniquet. The older man was in the doorway. The wife was next to him. The 2 younger men were behind them, one in the hall. The younger woman was at the foot of the bed. All 5 of them were between me and the door. I got the line in. Miss Ada didn't flinch on the stick, which told me she was deeper than I liked. I drew up the D50 and pushed it slow. Her color started to come back within about 30 seconds. Dextrose is one of those medicines that feels like a magic trick when it works. She wasn't awake yet, but she was closer. I'm going to need to get her to the truck, I said without looking up. We'll take her to Baptist in town. Nobody answered. I looked up. The older man was still in the doorway. His hands were still folded across his stomach. His expression hadn't changed the whole time I'd been in the room. She stays, he said. I thought I'd misheard him. I asked him to repeat it. He didn't repeat it. He just kept his eyes on me. The wife spoke instead. Quiet voice. She's better now. You fixed her. She can stay. I explained, in the tone I used with people who were scared and not thinking straight, that a sugar this low meant something was going on we needed to sort out in a hospital. That she was 72 and had another episode coming if we didn't. I heard my own voice, and it sounded thinner than usual. I stood up. I said I needed to step out to the truck and grab the stretcher. Nobody moved. The younger woman at the foot of the bed hadn't looked away from me since I walked in. Not once. She wasn't looking at her grandmother. She was looking at me. Excuse me, I said. Regular voice. Not loud. The older man tilted his head about an inch. Nothing else. I have thought about that half-minute a lot since. What I remember most clearly is not being afraid, exactly. I remember cataloging. The window behind me was painted shut. I could see the paint bridging the sash. The bed was between me and the window anyway. There were 5 of them. The older man was maybe 240. The younger 2 were solid. The room smelled like old sweat now that I was paying attention, and it wasn't coming from the bed. I said it again. I need to step out to the truck. The younger of the 2 men, the one in the hall, said, "You've got what you need in that bag, don't you?" It wasn't a question. He said it flat. That's when I heard Ray on the stairs. He was calling up ahead of himself the way he always did. Ray never surprised a family in a house. He'd holler from the porch, holler from the stairs. That night he came up the stairs and he was already talking before he got to the top. "Hey, I'm coming up with the monitor," he said. "How we doing up there?" He stepped into the hallway behind them. I couldn't see him past the older man, but I could feel the change in the room the second he was there. He'd have taken in the doorway, the 4 backs facing him, me on the far side of the bed with my hands empty. Ray was quiet, but he wasn't slow. He said, at full volume, no hurry in it, "I'm gonna go grab the stair chair and the second bag out the truck. Dispatch, this is Medic 12. We're gonna need a second unit for a lift assist. 72-year-old female, altered. We'll be transporting to Baptist." He hadn't keyed his radio. I could see the mic clipped to his shoulder from the angle I had. He was just saying it out loud, into the hallway, like he was on the radio. And then he did key it, and he did call in. But he made the whole announcement first, in that hallway, so everybody in the house heard every word of it. "Copy," he said, to nobody. "Second unit en route." For a second, nothing happened. Then the older man stepped aside, just stepped aside, like he'd been asked politely, and the wife stepped with him, and the 2 younger men moved back into the hall to make room. The younger woman at the foot of the bed didn't move at first. She kept looking at me. Then the older man said her name low and she moved too. Ray came in past them. He didn't say a word to me. He just put his hands under Miss Ada's shoulders, and I got her legs and we carried her down that hallway and out to the truck without a stretcher, without a chair, without stopping. The 5 of them watched us go. Nobody offered to help. Nobody asked where we were taking her. We got her loaded. Ray shut the doors and got in the front and pulled us out of that driveway at a speed I don't think that ambulance had ever gone on gravel. Neither of us talked for the first mile. My hands were shaking so hard, I had trouble getting the second bag of fluid spiked. About 4 miles down the road, Miss Ada opened her eyes. She looked at the ceiling of the truck for a while. Then she looked at me. She was clear. Sugar was up to 110 by then, and she was clear. She said, "Don't take me back there." I said, "Ma'am, we're going to the hospital. We're not taking you back." She said, "Ever. Don't ever take me back there." I told her okay. I filed the report. I told my supervisor everything I've told you. There was a welfare check the next week. She had a sister over in Alabama who came and got her from the hospital before discharge. I don't know what the sheriff's people found at the house, or didn't find, and I never asked. I know Miss Ada didn't go back. I know that because my supervisor told me, and because I asked. Ray and I ran calls together for another 2 years before he moved on to fire. We only ever talked about that night once. He said the thing he noticed coming up the stairs was that none of them turned to look at him. 5 people in a hallway, a stranger coming up behind them, and not one of them turned their head. He said that was what told him. The complaint came in on a single sheet, no name at the top, mailed from a public library in Anchorage, in an envelope with no return address. Whoever typed it up had used the field office phone number they must have found on a poster in a bar. That's usually how it starts with fishing crews. They don't call. They send a piece of paper and wait to see if anyone actually comes. I've been doing labor investigations for the department for about 6 years. Wage theft mostly. Sometimes the more serious stuff. By August 2022, I thought I could read a bad operator from the parking lot. The complaint listed 3 things. Paychecks running 8 to 12 weeks behind. Passports and IDs collected at hire and held for safekeeping. Fines against crew for things like attitude and gear loss that were coming in higher than the paycheck they'd finally get. I flew into Dutch Harbor on a Tuesday. The company, I'll just call them Northline, ran 2 crab boats and a longliner out of a leased slip on the far side of the harbor. Their office was a converted shipping container with a portable AC unit rattling in the window. The manager met me at the door in a clean fleece jacket with the company logo on the chest. Big smile, firm handshake, coffee already poured. He was ready for me. That was the first thing that felt wrong. He had a folder with copies of every timesheet, every pay stub, every hire packet, and a printed spreadsheet of voluntary deductions. He walked me through it like a man giving a tour of a museum. Everything was labeled. Everything had a signature. The passports, he said, were kept in a safe on his desk because the guys lose them, and then we can't get them home. He showed me the safe. He gave me the combination without me asking. I asked to speak with the crew. He said absolutely, of course, whatever I needed. Then he added, very casually, that he'd walk me down to the boats himself, since insurance required an escort on the docks. The Cordelia was the older of the 2 crab boats, paint peeling near the waterline, deck scrubbed too clean for a working vessel mid-season. 8 men in orange bibs standing more or less in a line by the wheelhouse. The manager introduced me. He didn't leave. I asked him, politely, to give us the space. He said he'd stand at the top of the ramp. He did, about 40 feet away, close enough to see every face on that deck. I talked to each of them for maybe 15 minutes. Every single one told me the same thing. Pay was fine. A little late sometimes, but it always came. Bunks were fine. Food was fine. No, they'd never been fined for anything. No, nobody had ever held on to their documents. One guy, a kid maybe 22, kept looking past my shoulder the whole time he answered. Another one, older, kept his hands in his pockets and gave one-word answers in an accent I couldn't place. The last man on the line was called Merrick. Broad shoulders, sunburn across the bridge of his nose. He shook my hand and said everything was fine, same as the rest. Then, right as I was closing my notebook, he said, "Ma'am, can I ask you a question about my last check?" I said, "Sure." He said, "The line that says equipment, what does that mean legally? If I signed, but I didn't know what I was signing." I said we could talk about that off the boat if he wanted. He looked once toward the ramp. He said, "Tomorrow morning, coffee place across from the fuel dock, 6. I said I'd be there. I spent that night in a room above a bar, with plywood walls and a heater that clicked on every 4 minutes. I didn't sleep much. I've had guys back out of interviews before. It's the most common thing in this job. But something about the way he'd asked, right at the end, after the manager had already turned to walk down the ramp, sat wrong with me. Like he'd been counting the seconds. 6 a.m., the coffee place was half full of fishermen and one deckhand from the state ferry. Merrick came in at 10 past. He didn't sit down. He ordered a coffee to go and stood at the counter with his back to me. Then he turned, made eye contact for maybe 2 seconds, and walked out. I paid for my coffee and followed him about a minute later. He was out on the gravel by the fuel dock, looking at the water. I said good morning. He said, "I was wrong yesterday. Everything is fine at Northline. I don't have any complaints. I don't want to file anything. Please don't put my name on anything." I asked him what happened between yesterday and now. He shook his head. He said, "I was tired yesterday. I misspoke." His voice was flat, like he was reading it. He said thank you and walked back toward the docks. I watched him go. He didn't turn around. I went back to the office container. The manager was there. Same fleece, same smile. He said he heard I'd been down at the coffee place. He said it in a friendly way, like he was just making conversation about a small town. He said, "Merrick's a good guy, little bit of a worrier." I hadn't told him I'd met Merrick. Nobody at the coffee place knew who I was. That was when I understood what I was looking at. I didn't argue. I thanked him for his time, told him I had enough to write up a summary, and said I'd be flying back to Anchorage in the morning. He walked me to my rental. He waited until I pulled out of the gravel lot before he went back inside. I didn't fly back to Anchorage. I drove around the harbor and checked into a different room under a name that wasn't on the paperwork I'd shown at the company office. I called my supervisor from a landline at the bar downstairs and told her I needed 2 more days and a subpoena for the crew list and the hire packets. Then I started working differently. I stopped going to the boats. I went to the laundromat, the grocery store. The one bar the crew actually drank at, not the one the manager had recommended. I went at the end of shifts. I didn't wear anything with a department logo. I ordered food and sat and waited. The first guy I talked to that way was the older one who'd kept his hands in his pockets. I recognized him buying cigarettes at the gas station attached to the grocery store. I said his first name. He froze. I told him I wasn't there to get him in trouble. I told him whatever he said to me, his name would not appear anywhere the company could see. He talked to me for 40 minutes standing in the parking lot next to the ice machine. The passports were in the safe, yes, but the combination the manager had given me was fake. There was a second book of fines the guys never saw until deduction day. If you complained, your check got lost in the mail for another 3 weeks. If you tried to quit before the season ended, you owed the company for your flight up, your gear, your bunk, your food, calculated at a rate nobody could ever get a straight answer on. I got 7 of the 8 men on the Cordelia over the next 36 hours. 1 at the laundromat, 1 outside the clinic, 1 in the walk-in cooler of the grocery store because he worked a second job, stocking shelves in the off hours to catch up on money he was owed. Each of them said some version of the same thing. Each of them asked me not to use their name until they were off the boat and paid out. The 8th one wouldn't talk to me anywhere. I don't know if he was in on it or just too scared. I stopped trying after the second attempt because I didn't want him to tell the manager. Merrick I saved for last. I found him on the beach past the cannery, throwing rocks at the water. He saw me and didn't run. I told him I already had statements from 7 of his crewmates. I told him he was not the person who broke this. I told him what the whistleblower protections actually meant in plain words, no forms. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The morning I met you at the coffee shop, someone had gone through my locker the night before. Everything was there, but everything was in the wrong order." He gave me the statement. 2 hours. I wrote it down and read it back to him. He signed it. The official investigation opened 4 weeks later. The subpoena went in for the hire packets, the actual safe contents, the pay records, and the internal fine ledger the manager had never mentioned. The passports were where the older guys said they'd be. The fake combination was in the manager's desk drawer on a post-it note. The second ledger was on a laptop in the office container. Northline was cited for wage theft, unlawful retention of identity documents, retaliation, and misrepresentation to a federal investigator. They paid out on several statutes. About 2/3 of the crew got back wages. Some of it took another year. Merrick got whistleblower protection, kept his job at a different outfit, and last I heard was still fishing out of a different port. The part I think about is not the ledger, or the fake combination, or the ceremony of the interview on the boat with the manager watching from the ramp. It's the 12 hours between Merrick asking me his question and Merrick taking it back. Someone knocked on his door that night and said something to him. I'll never know what. He wouldn't tell me, and I didn't push. Whatever it was, he still signed the statement in the end. Most people don't. The car was a gray Buick Century, probably a 99 or 2000, parked at the back edge of Lot C, where the light from the last sodium lamp barely reached. I noticed it on my second night at the mall in October. By the time November rolled around, I stopped noticing. That was the problem. I worked graveyard shift at Mid-City Mall, off Bardstown Road in Louisville. Not the fancy one out east. This was the tired one. Half the storefronts already dark. A Dollar Tree and a payday loan place doing most of the traffic. My job was simple. Drive the golf cart around the exterior lots every hour, check the loading docks, sit in the little booth by the north entrance and watch cameras until 6 a.m. The company handbook was very clear about vagrants. You couldn't move anyone unless there was a complaint from a tenant or property management. And in Lot C, nobody complained. The stores that faced it had closed years ago. It was just cracked asphalt and one guy in a Buick. I called him Buick Guy in my head, then just Buick after a while. First time I actually saw him was around week 3. I was doing my 2 a.m. loop and my headlights swept across his windshield, and there he was, sitting up in the driver's seat, wide awake, watching me. Late 50s maybe. Gray beard, trimmed neat, which surprised me. Most people living in their cars around there weren't clean like that. He had a little book open on the steering wheel and a pen in his hand. He didn't flinch when the lights hit him, just kept writing. I told my supervisor, a woman named Denise who worked days and hated being called after 8 p.m. She said what I already knew. No complaint, no removal. Just log it, she said. So I logged it. Vehicle present, individual present, non-responsive, every night. Week 4, he started waving at me. Small wave, just fingers off the steering wheel, the way farmers wave at each other from their trucks on country roads. I waved back the first time because it felt rude not to. After that, it became a thing. I'd roll past around 2, he'd wave, I'd nod. He never got out, not once that I saw. I got curious around Halloween. I'd finished my north loop early, and I parked the cart on the far side of a dumpster corral in Lot C, killed the lights, and just watched him for a while through the little pair of binoculars we kept in the booth for reading license plates. He was writing, not scribbling, not doodling, writing. Every few minutes a car would pull into the mall lot, mostly people cutting through to get to the 24-hour Kroger next door, and he'd lift his head, look at the plate, and put something down in the book. Then he'd wait. Then another car. Same thing. I watched him do it for maybe 40 minutes. He filled up most of a page. That first night I thought maybe he was just bored. People living in cars have to do something with their brains. My uncle counted trains when he was out of work for a year, and he wasn't crazy. He was just bored out of his mind. I let it go. But I kept watching after that. Not every night. Enough. He was doing it every single time I looked. Cars would come in, he'd note them down, and then, when the same car came back a second time on a different night, he'd do this thing where he'd flip back through pages, checking, cross-referencing. I brought it up with the day shift guy, a kid named Cole who was maybe 20 and mostly played on his phone. He shrugged. "Weirdo's gonna weird," he said, "long as he don't pee on the building." November 2nd, a Tuesday, I found the notebook. Not because I stole it, because he left the car. That was the first time I'd ever seen the Buick empty. I did my 2 a.m. loop, and the driver's seat was just No one. Door unlocked. I could see because the dome light was on, real faint, like the battery was almost dead. I stopped the cart maybe 15 feet away and just sat there. I want to be honest here. I knew I shouldn't get out. Company policy, personal safety, the whole thing. But there was a notebook on the dashboard, open, and I could see rows and rows of numbers, and something in my chest was already moving before my head caught up. I walked over, kept looking around for him. I figured he'd gone to use the bathroom behind the old Sears. That's where guys like him usually went. I had maybe a minute. The pages weren't random. License plates, Kentucky, Indiana, some Tennessee, time next to each one. And next to some of them, maybe one out of every 8 or 9, a small letter, A, B. Sometimes a check mark, sometimes a little tick. There was a column on the far right side of the page, and in that column, next to the checked ones, he'd written short things. Blue Civic, back seat covered. F150, tarp. White van, 2 men, no plate front. My own patrol cart plate was in there. Recent page, no mark next to it. I flipped one page back, same layout. Flipped back again. He'd been doing this for weeks, longer maybe. The oldest page I could reach had the corner curled and stained brown from coffee or something. Under the notebook there was a folded piece of paper, not a page from the book, a photocopy. I unfolded the top edge just enough to see it, and it was a printed missing persons flyer. One of those ones the state police put out. A woman's face. I didn't recognize her. There was a note in the same handwriting across the bottom of the flyer. Possible sighting September 14th, silver sedan, Lot C, 1:42 a.m. That's when I heard the door of the Sears service corridor click shut. I put everything back exactly the way it was. Walked, not ran. Got back on the cart and pulled away without turning on the headlights, which is against policy. And I sat in the booth for the next hour with my hand on the phone. I didn't call anyone that night. I didn't know what to say. He hadn't done anything. As far as I knew, he was some old man writing down license plates in a parking lot. And if I called the cops on him for that, they'd laugh at me. But the flyer sat in my head, and the checked plates. I told Denise the next morning, in person, standing in her office while she pretended to read email. I said I thought there was something wrong with the guy in Lot C, and I wanted permission to loop in Louisville Metro. I expected her to push back. She didn't. She said, "Honestly, we've been trying to get rid of that car for 6 weeks, and legal keeps blocking it. If you want to make the call, make the call. I'll back you." I called the non-emergency line that afternoon. The officer who came out that night was a woman named Reyes. Short, calm, took her time. I met her by the north entrance and pointed her toward Lot C, and she said, "Just stay here, okay?" I stayed. I watched from the booth camera on Channel 4. She parked one row behind him, walked up on the passenger side the way they teach you, tapped on the window. He rolled it down. They talked for maybe 15 minutes. She wasn't tense. She wasn't reaching for anything. At one point, she actually laughed. Then she pulled out her radio. Another cruiser showed up. Not fast, not lights and siren, just showed up. They got him out of the car. He was steadier than I expected. He let them pat him down, and he sat on the curb and he talked for a long time, holding the notebook the whole time, showing them pages, pointing at things. Reyes came back to the booth around 4 a.m. and told me most of it, because I think she could tell I was going to worry about it either way. The guy had been a detective in Indiana, state police, not a big city, some small town outside Evansville. He'd worked missing persons and trafficking for almost 20 years. About 3 years ago, he'd started having problems. She used a clinical word for it that I don't remember exactly, some kind of schizoaffective thing. He lost cases, then he lost the job, then he lost his apartment. His brother had been looking for him for 2 years. The notebook wasn't nothing, according to Reyes. Some of the plates in there were real leads, or at least they matched patterns he'd been trained on. It just wasn't his job to write them down anymore. He'd been sitting in that Buick trying to solve cases nobody had asked him to solve, because it was the only thing that still felt like being useful. They didn't arrest him. They called his brother. The brother drove down from Bloomington the next morning. I was off shift by then. I found out later they got the Buick towed and the brother took him back home. I don't know what happened after that. Denise heard through property management that the family was trying to get him into some kind of program. I still worked the same lot for another 6 months before I quit for a warehouse job with better hours. For a while, every time a car sat too long at the back of Lot C, my chest did a little thing. But it was always just employees on double shifts, or somebody sleeping off a fight, or teenagers doing what teenagers do. The part I keep coming back to isn't the notebook, it's the wave. Every night at 2 a.m., the little farmer wave off the steering wheel from a guy who was, in his own head, still on the job, still watching the lot, watching me watch him back, probably wondering why I never wrote anything down. That's the end of today's episode, guys. Tell me in the comments which story you want to hear more about. And don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy this format. We pulled apart another set of strange 4chan posts, and a few of them had that uncomfortable, this could happen anywhere feeling. Maybe don't dwell on it too much tonight. See you in the next video.